Hello, everyone. In his book, Core Questions in Philosophy, Elliott makes a series of criticisms towards Aquinas' five ways. However, as Sober helpfully points out, he is presenting and evaluating a surface reading of Aquinas' arguments, and readers who are more familiar with Aquinas' thought would point out that in order to truly understand and appreciate Aquinas' five ways, we need to have an understanding of Aquinas' broader philosophical context in which these arguments were meant to be understood. In this video, I would like to therefore discuss Elliott Sober's objections to the five ways and offer replies from the broader context of Aquinas' philosophy in order to assist you in thinking deeper about these fascinating topics. And I have a PPT to go with my lecture. Sober's first objection, found on the 7th edition of his book from page 41 to 42, is that Aquinas' first and second way depend on a supposedly outdated Aristotelian view of motion and cause, which asserts that an object cannot move unless its motion is sustained by a force that keeps it in motion. Since Newton states that an object, after it is acted upon by a force, will remain in a state of uniform motion unless acted upon by a force without the need for a conjoint mover, Aquinas and Aristotle's view is supposedly mistaken. However, as the philosopher Edward Fraser points out, Aristotle and Aquinas' philosophical understanding of causation and motion is independent of their physical examples. For Aristotle and Aquinas, motion or any type of change is the result of the actualizations of potentialities, and potentialities need to be actualized by something already actual. And this Aristotelian principle, often termed the principle of causality, not only does not contradict Newton's law of inertia, but is in fact what Newton's law presupposes. For example, by Sober's account, Newton's law says that if an object is acted upon by a force, then it will accelerate. An object that isn't acted upon by a force won't accelerate, which means it will remain at rest or in uniform motion. Yet, this is simply a scientific description for the deeper reality that the potentiality for an object to be changed in any way, such as to be accelerated, won't be actualized unless it is actualized by something already actual, such as an outside force, which explains why motions occur in the universe in the first place. The uniform motion of an object too requires an initial outside force that is responsible for the conserved kinetic energy that the object's uniform motion presupposes. Sober's objection comes from his mistaken notion that Aristotle and Aquinas' account of motion only include local motion or changing positions. However, for Aristotle and Aquinas, motion meant any kind of change whatsoever, including quantitative, qualitative, relational, and substantial changes, because they're all just different kinds of actualizations of potentialities by something already actual, regardless of the potentiality in question is about acceleration, gaining virtuous habits, or to be created or annihilated. As such, there is in fact no contradiction between Newton's law and Aristotle and Aquinas' principle of causality. Sober's second objection, on page 42, is that even if one grants the principle of causality and concludes that there is a first cause, one still cannot show why this first cause is God. Aquinas, in fact, explicitly shows how God's divine attribute or characters as an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good or all-PKG God can be derived from his notion of the first cause in Summa Theologiae, first part, questions 3 to 43, whereas Elliott Sober probably only read question 2 on the existence of God. I will provide a brief sample here for how Aquinas would derive divine attributes from his notion of first cause, which, as I explained in my first video, is pure actuality unlimited by potentiality. Now, pure actuality must be supreme perfection, because perfection results from the actualization of potentiality, and pure actuality is fully actualized in himself without an actualized potential. Pure actuality, since he is not limited by potentiality, must also be infinite, Since time and space is the measure of change as the actualization of potentiality, and since pure actuality does not undergo change as the actualization of potentiality, he exists outside of space and time, and is thus eternal as well as immutable. Pure actuality is also immaterial, because that which exists within space and time as mutable object is matter. Since pure actuality does not exist in space and time, he is then not matter but immaterial. Pure actuality must be all true, good, and beautiful, because truth, goodness, and beauty are, ontologically speaking, actuality or being or perfection looked at by the intellect, will, and heart, the three spiritual faculties of the human person. Pure actuality is the source of all actuality or being or perfection, and thus he is the source of all truth, goodness, and beauty. Pure actuality must be all-powerful, because since he is purely actual without the need to be actualized in any way, he can impart actuality or causal power without the need to borrow it from or to be actualized by anyone else or anything else. Pure actuality must be all-knowing and personal, because he contains the form of all created or caused things, which were preeminent in him in an immaterial or abstract way, without himself being those created objects. Just as ideas of things known are as such present in our intellect abstractly, which does not materially become the things known. Pure actuality must be all-present, because he exists immanently in all things, not as their constitutive part, but as the transcendent source of their existence, who creates them and maintains them in existence by combining their existence with their essences. As such, Aquinas can derive all the key divine attributes from his notion of first cause as pure actuality, thereby showing that the first cause can indeed be reasonably argued to be an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God. Sober's third objection on page 42 is that just because every event can be traced back to a cause outside of nature, it does not show that there is only one such cause. Just as simply because everyone has a birthday, it does not follow that everyone has the same day as their birthday. Again, Aquinas has already addressed this problem in Summa Theologiae, first part, question 11. In brief, pure actuality must be one and only, because one thing is different from another by virtue of the actualities or perfections that they possess or lack thereof. Yet, pure actuality possesses all perfections. Hence, one pure actuality cannot be distinguished from another, if there is another, because they all possess the same highest pure actuality and perfections. Thus, there can be only one pure actuality or God. Sober's fourth objection on page 43, why can't nature be infinitely old, is also based on a misunderstanding of Aquinas, because Aquinas does not even attempt to somehow go back in history to the beginning of time through the first and second ways. Specifically, Aquinas in Summa Theologiae, first part, question 46, distinguishes between two kinds of causal chains or series: an accidentally ordered causal theory that has succession in time, such as a father who begets a son, and later on the son begets his son until infinity, and an essentially ordered causal chain or series that is simultaneous, such as an atom cannot exist in one moment of time unless its potentiality for existing is simultaneously actualized by something even further, such as protons, neutrons, and electrons. The protons and neutrons cannot exist in the same moment too, unless their potentiality for existing is simultaneously actualized by something too, such as quarks. This example shows that finite things such as atom, protons, and electrons, actually neutrons, are all composed of potentiality and actuality, and thus always need to be actualized in some ways by or borrow actuality from something else. The same applies to quarks and electrons. They too go through change, such as creation and transformation, and thus too are composed of potentiality and actuality, and thus need to be actualized simultaneously by something else, something yet further. However, it does not matter how long this essentially ordered simultaneous causal chain goes, even if it goes to infinity. All we have are objects that, in order to exist, must be actualized by or borrow actuality from other objects. And even an infinite number of such objects or secondary or intermediate causes cannot explain where actuality comes from in the first place, unless we arrive at God as pure actuality, who can actualize others without himself needing to be actualized. As such, God is a first cause, not in the sense of time, but in the sense that he can give actuality or power or existence to anything else, and he himself does not need to be given actuality by anything else. And without God, we then won't be able to account for where actuality comes from in the first place, for those who need to borrow it or to be actualized in order to exist simultaneously here and now. And this is what Aquinas truly means when he says no first cause, no secondary or intermediate causes. Sober is thus simply mistaken when he says Aquinas' argument requires us to go back in time. Maybe a simpler example is if I want to charge my cell phone cannot charge itself. So if I connect my cell phone to my tablet, but the tablet cannot charge itself either. So I have to connect my tablet with my laptop. But my laptop can't really charge itself either. I have to eventually find a power source. And it doesn't matter how many cell phones, tablets, and computers that I'm connecting, none of them can explain where that electricity is coming from that is charging my phone, because none of them can generate electricity by themselves. So I have to find a source, something like pure actuality, who can give energy without himself has to borrow energy from anyone else. So that's the difference between primary causality, right, who is pure act, and secondary or intermediate causalities, who are composites of potency and act, therefore has to borrow actuality from something else. Sober's fifth objection, which is found on page 43, is that if we simply assert that some events have no cause, then we no longer need a first cause to explain it all. From Aquinas' perspective, however, a cause is a reason or explanation for why something exists the way it does. If one assumes that something has no cause nor reason for its being, one would be in fact suggesting that reality is in fact not entirely intelligible or can be understood. Now, if what it takes to deny Aquinas' argument is to deny the intelligibility of entire reality, this already shows the strengths of Aquinas' arguments. However, even if one does deny that reality is intelligible, one would seem to find oneself in a contradiction. To say that reality is not intelligible is already to say something about reality that is intelligible. Hence, this objection seems like a self-undermining position. Sober's 6th to 20th objections, which is found from page 44 all the way to page 51, which are all directed at Aquinas' third way, are all based on a misunderstanding of what Aquinas means by contingency and necessity. For Aquinas, as he explains in his work On Being and Essence, a finite thing is contingent because its essence and existence are distinct. And if this was not the case, we would know if a thing exists or not simply by knowing what a thing's essence or nature is. Yet this is not the case. Consider what you might know what Japanese river altars are. But from this knowledge, can you know if Japanese river altars still exist? Now, if a thing's essence and existence are distinct, they then do not possess existence in their essence or nature, and thus has to have something else to impart existence to it. Otherwise, it will lose its existence and perish. And a thing cannot really create its own existence because if a thing was to create its own existence, it would have to exist before it existed in order to cause itself. Nor can a thing impart existence to itself after it's existed, because a cause cannot cause an effect that it doesn't have the power to cause. Now, if existence does not belong to the nature or essence of a cause, then it simply has no power to cause it. Yet, even an infinite number of objects that need others to impart existence to them, this still does not explain where does existence come from in the first place, unless we arrive at a first cause. First, in the sense that his nature or essence are identical, right? His nature or essence is identical with his existence, and he thus exists necessarily because it is in his very nature to exist. And such first cause must be pure actuality or God, because only pure actuality does not need his existence to be actualized by something else. As such, only God is necessary in this absolute sense, and all other things are contingent. And this is why contingent things, even if existed for a very, very, very long time, they would still need God, who necessarily exists, to explain their existence. Moreover, contrary to Sober's position, although numbers may seem necessary, but they're only necessary in a relative sense, because numbers are the results of our mind's abstraction on the quantities of finite things that are themselves contingent. As such, numbers are not pure actuality also, because pure actuality encompasses all perfections, not just those pertaining to quantities and abstractions. Also, as explained above, pure actuality must be one, yet numbers are many. Sober's 21st objection, which is found on page 51 and 52, on Aquinas' fourth argument, is too based on a misunderstanding of what Aquinas means. For Aquinas, things exhibit certain general modes of being called the transcendentals, such as goodness, truth, and nobility, which belongs to all beings analogically, because these transcendentals are convertible with their existence or being. Aquinas argues that the reason why creatures only possess these transcendental perfections in certain degrees is precisely because they do not possess them per se in their essence, but only participate in them in an imperfect sense. If they do possess these perfections per se, they will simply be goodness, truth, nobility themselves in a maximal sense. Now, even an infinite number of creatures who participate in these perfections still cannot explain where these perfections ultimately come from, just as even an infinite number of creatures who need to borrow actuality from something else still cannot explain where actuality ultimately comes from, unless with reference to pure actuality or God, who is the source of all being or existence, thus these transcendental perfections that are convertible with their being or existence in his essence per se in a maximal way. If you are interested in this, I would highly recommend Aquinas' book, that is often translated as On the Power of God, 3.5. In chapter 5, Sober does not seem to offer a clear criticism of Aquinas' fifth way, but relates it, along with Paley's argument, to discussions of evolution and creationism in chapter 6, and science in chapter 7. As such, I will not make further comments on this topic, except pointing out that Aquinas' fifth argument is fundamentally different from Paley's, in that Paley works with a problematic mechanistic view of the world that Aquinas does not, and that Paley's argument does not obviously lead to God as pure actuality the way Aquinas' argument does. In conclusion, as I have discussed, Elliott Sober's criticisms of Aquinas build on a surface reading of Aquinas that does not account for Aquinas' broader philosophical context necessary for understanding and appreciating his 5 ways. Hopefully, I have provided some useful information here that might interest you to think and read about these profound topics even further. Thank you.